By 2026, the ordinary things you trust, your phone, a classroom mentor, the car that parks outside, will be the exact places where ordinary life turns into something you can't unsee. Content warning. These stories contain implied sexual privacy violations, home invasion, and stalking. If these topics are difficult for you, please take care as you listen. There's a pattern running through all three accounts you're about to hear. Familiarity becoming threat, small oddities building into full-blown fear, and institutions that try to help but often leave victims feeling exposed. Each story is true as told by the person who lived it. I'll introduce each narrator, then let them speak in their own words, and I'll pause between them to point out the thread that ties them together. Why, looking toward 2026, these particular kinds of violations feel especially urgent. If you like deep, unsolved, true stories that dig below the headlines, tap subscribe now and stay with me through all three. The first story begins in a campus classroom, the kind of place where people go to grow and trust the adults around them. It should have been safe. It wasn't. I was an English major, a sophomore with a scholarship and a pile of books stacked on my bedside table. The narrator begins. I went to seminars, stayed late for office hours, and believed I'd chosen people who would help me, not hurt me. The campus is a blur of leaf-swept paths and lamp-lit libraries in her memory. She remembers the smell of hot coffee in the union and the chorus of other students hurrying between lectures. In her mind, the set pieces are ordinary. A gap-year friend group who liked movies, the greasy spoon on the corner where she celebrated grades, and a TA who was helpful and oddly attentive. He was called Roar. He started as the friendly teaching assistant everyone appreciated, quick with feedback, always in the front row to answer questions. He knew the syllabus backward, she says. He'd stop by and ask about my paper drafts, and he praised my work in ways I hadn't expected. At first it felt like mentorship. After a few months, it felt like something else. There was also Luke, a classmate who seemed easy and funny, the kind of person who knows how to make you laugh in a boring lecture. They dated for a little while. It was normal, banal, the safest kind of young romance that fans the rumor mill just enough to make other students glance. The first strange thing was a camera flash while she and Luke took pictures at a party. Nothing felt wrong then. Phones flash at parties. Later, she noticed a series of photos that didn't belong, suggestive images of herself that she had never taken. They were on Luke's phone, tucked between selfies and screenshots. At first I thought maybe he'd saved them from a joke, she says. Then I saw the timestamp and realized some of the shots were from times I remembered being alone in my dorm. The way the light fell in the photos, the angle that showed only her silhouette, it didn't add up. She asked Luke about them. He was defensive, angry. He said he'd never taken them, that maybe someone had sent them to him. But when she scrolled further, she saw messages. Images sent from his phone to an unsaved number late at night. The messages were short and clinical. A link, then nothing. Her heart dropped. When I asked who he'd sent them to, he made jokes. Then his face went blank, and he said he didn't know. She remembers the flatness of that answer, as if someone had closed off a room inside his face. The real shock came when she discovered the number belonged to Roar. She'd matched it from a group thread, a name saved in a generic way on Luke's phone. She called the TA's office hours into question by the only way she knew how. She followed a thread of evidence until it led back to the one person who used to offer to help her edit essays. Confrontation felt impossible to script. She knocked on Roar's door with a mix of fury and the brittle hope that it would be some terrible, explainable mistake. He answered in a shirt with ink stains and a smile that suddenly didn't fit. He acted surprised at first, she says. But if you've ever watched someone realize they're cornered, you know that their surprise is practice. When she told him the images had been forwarded, he refused to talk. He claimed ignorance. He said he didn't know how the number ended up in his phone. The words either felt like a confession or like lies rehearsed so many times they had become a script. She took screenshots, backed up metadata, and went to campus security. The university opened a case, interviewed Luke, interviewed Roar. The police, after an initial intake, came with a formality that felt like a procedure more than a rescue. They asked me to file a report and gave me a number to call, she remembers. The investigator was polite but kept saying, "We'll see what we can do." The university quietly initiated an investigation. Roar was suspended from his TA duties and, later, formally removed from the campus classroom. Luke, which in the aftermath felt like a friend who should have protected her, distanced himself and then stopped answering texts. There were formal consequences, a campus sanction, a police report, the TA being fired from his position, but she felt hollowed out. Everything that followed was official, like a well-made TV episode, she says, but the part that mattered, my privacy, wasn't something they could stitch back together. Nights became small calculations. Who had keys to the building where she kept her papers? Who had access to photographs stored in cloud backups? She changed passwords, yes, but the image of himself as he used to be, someone safe to let into her academic life, was altered forever. Trust had lost its edges. Months later, after she thought the story had closed, there was the silver sedan. It appeared one night outside the sorority house, idling, its headlights off. She woke from a nap and threw open the curtain, the kind that used to cover her window and protect her from the street. The car's silhouette sat like a question mark on the curb. I couldn't tell who was inside, she says. The engine wasn't running, but the lights were on. He'd done it in a way that felt like a message. I'm still here, and I can be where you are. She called campus security. The car left. A patrol came later and found a tire mark on the lawn, but nothing more. She believes the narrator suspects Roar was involved, or at least that the silver sedan was connected to the earlier invasion of privacy. We must be careful here. She doesn't have proof beyond the way the timing and the pattern fit together, and she says so. But the fear it left, sitting there like an object that could be moved back into place at any time, was something the institutional response couldn't fix. At the high point of her telling, she returns to small details, the things a report never mentions, the way her stomach tightened at a knock, the jitter of her thumb when a notification arrived, the surreal feeling of seeing a photograph of yourself framed by someone else's gaze. She says she's fine, then corrects herself. I'm learning to be fine in pieces. What makes this story likely to haunt viewers in 2026 is the technology that connected everything. Images, messages forwarded across platforms, contacts saved without traceable history. By 2026, image-sharing apps and ephemeral messaging will be both more private and strangely easier to exploit. Private images travel far faster than legal systems can respond. When people we trust become the vectors of exposure, the damage is intimate and bureaucratically messy. Colleges will still be places of growth, but the tools students carry will increase the vectors where that trust can be violated. Pause and picture the motif: a campus at dusk, a phone unlocked on a nightstand, a silver sedan across the street. Those images are small and ordinary, but each one is a lever that can tilt someone's life into danger. The second story moves us out of communal campus life and into an isolated house where solitude can be both a sanctuary and a vulnerability. I was 22, Mikey says. My parents were gone for the weekend, and I liked that sort of quiet. I had music low, oil lamp in the kitchen, a kettle that always seemed to whistle in the morning. The things that felt like peace. He lived in a rural stretch where neighbors were distant and help meant an hour on the phone. His normal was a house that had creaks and a back porch that sighed in the wind. He liked the solitude. He believed he could manage any small worry. The night everything changed began with an ordinary interruption, a closet that had been shut now standing open. He woke to the sound because something had shifted. The hinge clicked. At first I thought it was the wind, he says. Then I heard a floorboard. It's a sound you don't hear in a house by yourself. It's a human sound. He felt the space close in around him, air too warm, the cheap glow of a hall light making everything sharper. He was half-dressed, lungs tight, and his hand found the phone on the nightstand. When he glanced, he saw two shapes near the foot of his bed. Figures, tall and silent like silhouettes against the dim light. One held something that flashed a thin arc of reflected metal. His flashlight beam caught them for an instant. They turned and fled, moving like a pair of shadows sliding past the doorway and out into the yard. He chased them barefoot across cold boards, through a back door that slammed behind him. In the hallway, he found a knife on the floor, a cheap kitchen blade, wiped clean enough to not leave obvious prints. The fact that it was there felt like a punctuation mark that someone had put on his life. They had been close enough to place it near him. He called the police. They came in the early morning calm, boots on the porch, flashlights banding the yard. They checked rooms, found a back gate jiggled open, an unlocked basement window. An officer asked whether he always left doors unlocked and suggested that maybe it was just kids looking for a thrill. What I needed was someone to say, "You're safe," he says. Instead I heard, "Be more careful." The phrasing stung, not because he wanted to blame, but because it shifted the focus to his behavior instead of the fact that strangers had been inside his house. The report was filed. The investigation was thin. A patrol log, photographs taken of the yard, a record of the knife. No fingerprints turned up, or at least none that led anywhere. The intruders had been careful, and when they vanished, they took most traces with them. The police were efficient in the way institutions are when there's nothing conclusive to follow. They completed the forms and left. What remained was an altered rhythm to his life. He installed new locks, pulled the curtains tighter, and slept in a sitting position for weeks. My dreams never let me forget the eyes reflecting a flashlight, he says. Nights became times to be negotiated, not enjoyed. When his parents came back, they offered to move him to a friend's place or let him stay with them. He refused, partly to not appear fragile, partly because leaving felt like acknowledging that his house had been violated in a way that could not be reversed. He thinks sometimes that he was targeted at random. Other times he believes the intruders had watched him. Footprints near the garage, items slightly shifted in the shed. He doesn't know. The uncertainty gnaws because it implies two terrible possibilities. Either he was chosen for no reason at all, which makes safety feel arbitrary, or someone took time to pick him, which means the risk could repeat. He drives with one eye on the rearview mirror on country roads. The sense that he had been seen in his most private space lingers. Looking ahead to 2026, rural vulnerability takes on a new angle. With more people working remotely in isolated communities and fewer routine checks from neighbors, the gap between help and harm widens. Used car sales and online marketplaces make anonymous commuting easier. Tools that anonymize presence, throwaway phones, burner emails, or even second-hand vehicles can let a stranger slip into a quiet life with fewer traces. Law enforcement in less populated areas often lacks resources, so victim experience can become a ledger of procedural sympathy rather than a restorative response. Mikey's story closes without a single arrest and without a satisfying sense of closure. The suspects are unknown. The knife had holes in the story where answers should be. That unresolved angle is the thing that keeps the memory alive. An ordinary night becoming a constant calculation of risk and a daily reminder that solitude offers both comfort and exposure. The third and final account is a portrait of urban anonymity transformed into a quiet campaign of intimidation. I moved to this city because I wanted a clean start, Natasha says. I'd just broken up. I found a small apartment on the third floor of an old building, and I thought the commute and the noise would be a healing sort of background. Her new routine was modest. Morning coffee, a walk through the neighborhood, a part-time job that allowed flexibility. At first, the city felt like a living room where she could sit and breathe. Then she began noticing small things. The first time, she thought it was coincidence. A man in a gray hoodie stood 2 buildings down from hers on a sidewalk, eyes forward, hands in sweatshirt pockets. A navy blue sedan was parked across the street for a long time that week. At first, she didn't think anything of it. Then she saw the same car at a different time, at a different place she visited, like the Chipotle she went to for a late lunch. I have a habit of scanning faces, she says. It's a small paranoia that city living gives you, but this was different because the same elements kept cropping up. What began as a series of unnerving sightings became explicit when a handwritten note was slid under her apartment door late at night. The paper lay creased against the baseboard and read in a blocky hand, "You should really close your blinds at night." The note felt intimate in a way that made her skin go cold, a stranger taking it upon themselves to instruct her how to live in her own space. It was policing that transcended law. It was the imposition of control. She called the building manager, who said he'd checked the cameras, only to find the building's security footage had gaps. The landlord offered to change the locks and advised her to keep her phone nearby. When she called the police, they came, took a report, and asked standard questions. Had she had a fight that might have provoked someone? Had she blocked numbers? The conversation drifted toward logistical fixes instead of an immediate plan of protection. They were sympathetic, she says, but when they can't tie the person to a location or a device, the response is limited. Her days shifted. She changed a few routines. She stopped visiting the Chipotle on that corner, took different walking routes, and pulled her blinds at dusk. But the most disorienting thing came months after she thought she had escaped. She visited her parents for the holidays, and, as she heard them tell the old stories that used to feel safe, she glanced out the window and saw a navy blue sedan across the street, idling. It was the same make she had memorized, the same dull shine where the paint had lost some gloss. Her hands went cold. I could be wrong, she tells us, careful to label the memory as suspicion rather than proof. But I know how a car looks after months. The dents, the sticker on the bumper, small things line your memory like beads. She moved again, not because the note made her leave, but because the lingering sight of a car planted the idea that safety was someone else's ledger entry. The stalker hadn't been directly violent, at least not in a way she could document, but the erosion of mobility was the violence. She no longer walked freely to friends' apartments at night. Her family stayed on alert when she visited. The note, the sightings, the car outside her parents' home, all of it combined into a slow constriction. In 2026, urban anonymity will be even more of a double-edged sword. Cars bought secondhand online can change hands without much trace. Social media algorithms can allow people to see where someone goes without stepping into a room. A person's patterns, where they grab coffee, when they check their mailbox, are more available than ever. Apps promise convenience and connection, but those same features can create breadcrumbs that someone with malicious intent can follow. For people like Natasha, the danger is not a single violent incident, but the daily narrowing of freedom. Between each of these stories, you'll notice recurring tools and motifs. The phone, the car, the bedroom, the smile of someone who used to help. Each is ordinary until someone uses it to remove your sense of control. That's the common terror. It's not only that an act happened, it's that normal life becomes a ledger of potential risk. Now, some connective analysis between stories. In the campus case, the misuse of trust came through an institutional figure and the flow of images across devices. In Mikey's case, physical isolation created an opportunity for intruders to cross thresholds with fewer witnesses. In Natasha's story, the city's density masked a singular focus of attention. By 2026, each of these vulnerabilities will be amplified in its own way. Image-sharing platforms will continue to become more encrypted, but also more distributed. Rural homes will face slower response times, even as technologies allow for more remote living. Urban lifestyles and secondary market cars will provide anonymity for both legitimate buyers and those who prefer to remain untraceable. These are observations, not rigid predictions. Each narrator labels parts of what they suspect and admits when they do not have proof. That honesty is part of what makes their accounts credible and, frankly, harder to dismiss. Returning to our narrators for moments of aftermath and deeper reflection. The campus narrator takes comfort in the small mundane acts of reclaiming life. Changing classes, attending study groups, wearing the same sweater that used to belong to someone she trusted, yet admits to a new hyper-awareness. If someone texts, and I don't expect it, my hands tighten, she says. I scroll through messages and see a name, and I plan responses like someone defusing a bomb. She has sought counseling and found it helpful, but says the psychological residue is stubborn. She keeps a list of contacts for anonymous reporting to various platforms, and she warns other students in a measured tone. Look at where your pictures live and who has access to your accounts. It's not about paranoia, it's about being realistic. Mikey, in the rural case, moved a few weeks after the break-in and now lives closer to a friend. Partly I moved because I didn't want to sit on the porch and look for faces in the trees, he says. He works a job that keeps him in daylight hours. Nights are still the hardest. He says he sleeps with a radio on low, a sound that reassures him human life exists beyond his house. There's an attempt to replace the boundary between peace and risk. He also volunteers at a local youth group, teaching kids simple home routines that make them feel safer. Things that aren't tactical but practical. Leave a light on, tell someone when you'll be home, pick a neighbor to check in. He is careful to avoid telling people to install devices or track strangers, reframing his advice as habits that signal presence and community rather than instruction on how to catch a perpetrator. Natasha talks about the way small acts of mobility returned as her confidence rebuilt. She enrolled in a daytime pottery class where the doors are always open, and she started calling friends before leaving a bar, just to have a voice moving with her. But she also recognizes that the feeling of being watched is slower to fade than the note itself. She now keeps a backup key with a trusted cousin and avoids using certain routes at night. She tells her parents everything, down to the make and color of cars she notices, because transparency with loved ones feels like insurance. She refuses to become defined by fear, but she admits that fear is an inconvenient but constant companion. Across all three stories, institutions played a mixed role. Universities and landlords took procedural steps. Police responded, but often with the caveat that without concrete leads, their options were limited. Those responses left victims to patch their privately felt harms on their own. That's the structural thread worth noticing as we look to 2026. Institutions may have policies, but policies and resources are not the same thing. When evidence is digital, dispersed, or absent, investigative capacity is constrained. There are questions here we do not answer. Were the silver sedan sightings tied to the campus TA? Were the intruders in Mikey's house acting at random or by design? Was Natasha's stalker someone she crossed paths with, or a person who learned her patterns in other ways? The narrators are careful to indicate their uncertainties. They offer suspicions, not verdicts. That restraint is important because it preserves both credibility and the dignity of those involved. If you're asking what to take away beyond the chill of these tales, there are a few humane, non-prescriptive observations. First, privacy and consent matter in small, everyday ways. In a photo you allow someone to take, in the passwords you keep, in whether you leave curtains open late at night. Second, isolation amplifies risk. Community, neighbors who check in, friends who know where you'll be, acts as a buffer, even when it can't guarantee safety. Third, technology is neutral in some ways and dangerous in others. It is a tool for connection, documentation, and sometimes violation. None of this is a call to paranoia. It's a call to clarity about the vulnerabilities that will likely become more common by 2026. Before we close, there's one last common image that keeps appearing across these stories. A car parked at a distance. It is a modern symbol of mobility, and in these tales, of anonymous presence. Whether a silver sedan idling outside a dorm, a navy blue car parked across from a parent's house, or a vehicle gliding past a country porch, this motif ties the stories together. Cars can be witnesses, they can be messages. By 2026, the used car economy and online anonymity might make such vehicles harder to trace. Another reason these accounts feel prescient. I want to end with an empathetic note to the people who shared these stories. They gave us access to moments no one should have to relive, moments that stay with you in the small, private ways. The automatic glance at the window when a notification chimes, the habit of pulling a curtain closed that used to be a formality, the list of people you check in with before leaving a room. Their resilience is not a tidy arc, it's a daily practice. They ask for a basic thing, that their stories be heard and that listeners remember the human cost behind every headline. If any of these stories resonated, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, please share respectfully in the comments. Your experiences matter, and the community here can be a source of support. Check the description for resources and links to organizations that help survivors of privacy violations, stalking, and home intrusion. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time to hit that button so you don't miss future updates. We'll return to this subject as narrators update their stories. One more thing before we go. Each narrator left their story in an unfinished place. The campus case ended with a car that might or might not be a threat. Mikey's home invasion closed with unanswered questions. Natasha's stalker followed her even after she moved away. Those unfinished edges are intentional. They are the parts that keep these stories living in our minds, because unresolved fear presses on the imagination more insistently than a neat conclusion. And so we end with a small, quiet cliffhanger. All three narrators said they would reach back out if anything new happened. If they do, I'll bring you the update. Until then, think about the ordinary objects in your life, the phone on your nightstand, the person who helps you with a paper, the car that seems to appear at the same time each evening. In 2026, those ordinary things may look the same, but their shadow could be longer. Thank you for listening. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear it, and take care of yourselves and each other out there.